Hello, friends, and welcome to the House Salt Book Club. Today, we're going to be talking about Hench, which was our November pick. My name is Marinés, and my channel name is My Name is Marinés, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars.
Nice. I'm Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. I'm sickly, so don't mind me. And I think I gave this 3. It felt more like a 4 at the end. Parts of it felt like a 4 at the end, but like the beginning dragged for me a little bit. So I think I landed on 3.
Hi everyone, I'm Paige from Minimal Bookie. Also sick across the continent. I think I landed on like a 3.5. It wasn't a complete love for me, but it was still like an enjoyable time overall, I think.
I'm Jordan from the Jordan Journals, and I really enjoyed it. Probably would land it somewhere in like a 3 to 4 star range.
Yeah, so we're like all between like 3 to 4 stars, so that's good. No outliers there. All right, so we're gonna jump into talking about this book. First up with the main character, Anna, because I feel like, she's like the most important character, obviously, but also this is like very character driven and very like heavy in her voice. It's like very much carried by her narrative voice. So what did you guys think about her character and about her narration style?
I think it was hard a little bit with Anna. So I listened to it on audiobook. Did we all do audio?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I think the audio was like a mix of like parts of me really enjoyed the narration, and then some of the choices were like, I don't know, I didn't like some of the voices she did and whatever. But like Anna generally, I seem to like I don't think I'm gonna find her necessarily super memorable. But I think this book leaned pretty well into this like, yeah, we have this like office dynamic / like kind of funny. Like it wasn't taking itself too seriously. And I feel like that's how Anna was too. So like that kind of seemed to work for me.
Yeah, I really liked the voice specifically, like Anna's voice, like the way she framed everything made it like the most interesting read to me. Because I feel like with these kinds of stories specifically, you do have to have a point of view that like it has to be different because of all the superhero stuff that we've been inundated with like throughout the years because of Marvel. And it reminded me a little bit of The Boys with like the irreverent way it sort of views these superhero things. It doesn't go too far to the extreme except for the end, which we will discuss. That part I was like, okay, this really feels like an episode of that. But I, for the most part, really liked her. I could not, like, I feel like it was interesting also to have someone who had a disability because of the superhero and how that fed into everything. Like it was never forgotten throughout the story. Like there was care given to it, and I really enjoyed that aspect of her character as well.
Yeah, I really liked her. I liked how it was a superhero story, but not. It felt different than anything else I've ever read because I traditionally love superhero media of like books and stuff. And it's different than anything else I've read, I guess, in that genre. But I also liked how she is a person that like is one of those bystanders of like a huge event, but then doesn't go on to really be like the super villain. Like she gets involved in it, but she's not like all of a sudden in a giant suit chasing down the people she thinks are bad guys.
I love that she was an office worker, that she was like, it's data. She's like, I'm like proof through data.
I love numbers and I do data.
Love that as the personality where she's like, I don't want to be in the field. I want to be safe in a cubby somewhere giving you the tea.
And every time they're like, okay, you're going to
she was always like the field.
So relatable. So true.
So there are a lot of things about this book that are like not that on paper are like not for me, like morally gray, like exploration. And I was thinking about this a lot because the thing we did just before this was talk about Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and like that as like a villain origin story. And like I've been having like arguments in my TikTok comments about like whether, I don't know, the purpose of villain origin stories and like humanizing evil and like how basically like that is not a story that I generally sign up for. So there's a lot on paper here that like shouldn't work for me, but it ultimately does in Anna's voice. even the narration style is like very linear. It is very like I did this and then I did this and then I got in the car and we went to the bad guy and like that is not my favorite style. But in Anna's voice, because it has that like a little bit of snark, it has observational humor. It's like making, as an HR person, I'm sure like data.
Yes.
Anybody who's ever had like, I don't know, somebody who's like a boss, like how was represented, like there was enough points of humor that it ultimately worked for me. And I think that the reason that this like look at what makes somebody choose to be a villain or on the side of a villain was more successful than something like Ballad, because this felt more mundane. It felt very much like, I don't know, she needed a job and that's how it started. And the exponentially growing, I was like, yeah, no, I'd be pissed too if my femur were broken in like 100 places. And like, so every part of it just felt like a natural sort of progression to how she ultimately got there. And I was like, damn, maybe in that situation, I too would have been on the side, you know, like, so that kind of thinking I think was overall more successful than like other versions of this, where it's like, why did this person become evil? So
well,
yeah, it felt like
a
very natural.
It's not as extreme of a swing either. Like she even in the book says, I don't want to murder people. I don't want them dead. I just want to like corrupt their lives. So it's not as like much as I want to start a war or something as extreme as that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even the way they set up the world of like, this is just the way that it is. Like, there's just heroes and there's villains and there's like temp agencies for henchmen and like whatever. And at first I was kind of like, but I actually didn't mind that it was sort of just like hand wavy. Like, this is just the way it is. It was that like worked because it was just like, okay, this is just like the world in which there are superheroes and supervillains and they test for them, and like that's just the way that it is. And the way that like it did the, you know, this is not a new theme of like, are heroes truly good and look at all the damage they do. Like there's all those jokes about like superhero insurance agencies and like, you know, people calculating in the Marvel movies like how much damage some of those movies would have done, right?
Yeah.
If that was real. And so this like really brought it to light when she was like talking about like, here's, you know, what damage all of these like superheroes do. Are they really heroes when they're like taking this many lives or whatever? So instead of it being like super morally gray or like, yeah, like this big diabolical whatever, it was just like, no, like this makes sense that some people would turn to villainy because it's like, well, who's really the hero and who's really the villain? And like just the disregard for human life if you're like on the bad guy's side or whatever.
Or
at the
property and people's homes.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead, Paige.
I was just gonna say, like, and she had to be relatable in that way for you to like buy in as a reader, specifically, like you're saying, Maddie, in terms of like her descent into villainy. But also part of it was she was never the most powered person in the room in the same way like Snow would have been in Ballad, where like there was the power dynamics at play, which made things icky. Like here, for the most part, she was also still in a vulnerable position, especially with like Super Collider, and then that element still left you with a sense of like there was still tension in every scene in terms of like, would she be okay? And then I feel like that was something missing in a lot of like other villain origin stories where they just are like too super powered versus other people, or like they're not given the sense of relatability or like vulnerability where you can empathize for them. Where with her, I was like concerned that she was going to get even more fucked up than she already was.
I feel like it was a good balance too of like overall her mission being like one part like, yeah, this is bad for humanity and like I can calculate the very specific way how it is, but one part like, and it's a little petty because he broke my leg.
Yeah.
And that was relatable to me, like the way that it was always personal to her, and she was like, no, I'm gonna like see this through. And so again, her character just ended up being a really good balance, which you needed in this work. And you know, like by the end we get a lot more like tangible. Like through the middle I was still asking questions about like what this was saying exactly about good versus evil and whatever, but by the end you get that very clear line of like between her and a conversation between her and Quantum, where it's like basically like it sucks that like people, they identify you as being a hero, they put you in this program, and if you're not a hero you're automatically a villain, and like there's no gray area in between. So you know,
and she just wants to exist.
Yeah, so she just wants to exist, and like she wants to kind of break the system. So it existed enough in that gray area that I think it was pretty successful. what do you guys, I guess we'll talk about Leviathan specifically. And then from there are just so many other side characters that like populate the world. So Leviathan, and then if there are any other characters that you have like specific things that you want to talk about. But what did you think about him as a supervillain and potentially love interest?
Yeah, this was where the audiobook, I think, made it like a little bit like because she makes his voice like very weird, right?
Yeah.
Like it's very like
Zerg.
And so I think if you're
It
reading
reminded me of
I mean,
Zerg the whole time.
well, okay, so Jordan, you also had because I was like, you know, like this voice, and then so I was like, I can't really get behind like feeling romantic feelings for him, but if I didn't have the voice, maybe I would, because there was still some like, you know, she was leaning into some of this, like he came to visit her when she, you know, was in like the hospital and some of this stuff, you know, of like, you're very important to me or whatever. So I can kind of get behind it as a concept of like, she's being made sort of, this is like a very slow progression into like supervillainy, like she's given the name the Auditor and whatever. So them being like a powerhouse like supervillain couple like is appealing as a idea, but like him and her, I don't necessarily even really understand like the dynamic. Why was she so sort of like drawn to him? Really, like she didn't really get a lot of it.
That was definitely my number one thing, especially toward the end, and how upset she was. I was like, I feel like we didn't have the emotional attachment that we needed for this reaction to be happening, where she's like, he's not the same. And I'm like, girly, why are we like, it was like, it felt a little much in terms of like what we got before the kidnapping. I was like, you didn't set this up enough for me to be as invested as you needed me to be.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think the audiobook.
Yes. Go ahead.
I think the audiobook made the voice like so robotic. Like I just couldn't picture anything other than Zerg from Toy Story in my head. That like it just was like really hard for me to picture him as like ever being human or having like human emotions. Like to me, he was like very clearly some kind of robot that I don't know. It was hard for me to get the connection between the two of them.
I also, that was like exactly what I was going to say, that I listened to the audiobook and the voice like completely like I don't know if that was like the only thing that made it so that by the time that I realized this was a love interest, I even went to my Discord and I was telling them how I got recommended this book a ton because I hated Assistant to the Villain, and everybody was like, no, Hench did it better. And so I was like, I don't know why people would make this comp, because Assistant to the Villain is about the romance and this doesn't have any romance. And I got like a few confused reactions, and then I was like, oh, I'm just seeing the romance. So I don't know if it was only the voice, but in my head, it wasn't even like that the voice was like too robotic. It was weird. It wasn't, if it was more robotic, I think it would have worked, but it was like a weird insecty robot sort of mix.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it just was not pleasant. But also the other thing,
describe them as mandibles too, which is very insect-like.
Yes, he definitely is got something that is not like traditionally like attractive and handsome, which is fine, but just didn't put my like brain in that headspace. But the other thing is that he was so much in the boss role for me, out of her other boss, and like the main comparison was like this boss who pretended to care and didn't, and this versus this other boss who maybe didn't seem like he cared and did. And so that was like the main thread going through my brain. And there were even like spots where she talked about like wanting to please him, like from the perspective of like doing a good job, like she wanted a good performance review, and she still was worried that he would fire her. And so all of those interactions were like boss employee. And so by the time the kidnapping, and she's like, oh, and the feelings and the emotions, I was like, what like I'm confused and I don't think I like this.
Yeah,
it went so fast that it almost felt like a Stockholm syndrome, almost like maybe very one-sided and not really reciprocated by Leviathan.
mean, I think it was. It was just like I think there was a big passage of time thing in this too, because sometimes the book would remind you that like, oh, like months have passed of like them working together. So, but we just didn't see those things. Like, I agree with Tracy, and I know that like Mari just mentioned this too. Like, I actually appreciate that he's not like the typical like, well, he's just like a hot villain, and so he's just like so hot,
Hot bad guy.
right? Because then it was just that like you see that all the time of like, well, he's really bad, but he's so hot. This was like, okay, like there's something there. You're saying that there's some kind of connection there, and it's not just about him being super hot. But I don't necessarily think we got some of those like day-to-day moments. Like, she just is kind of implying that like we've worked together a lot, and like there's been time for this like stuff to grow, but we don't necessarily see it. So yeah, I definitely feel like it's more of like sort of what Amy says here. Like, it felt more like an unattainable crush. Like, yeah, like a crush on the boss, sort of. But yeah, we kept being reminded of these like things.
I
didn't feel it at all.
Who wants to do a good job and is like impressed by the boss, and like the boss is like the super, like it felt very much like hero worship in a way, and when it wasn't that, it was like very star employee wants to do well, and I honestly, I believe everybody who caught it early, but I just did not. And when it got there, I was just like astounded. And I feel like I had to like rewrite my mental image of this guy, because like, everything about it was like not pointing in the direction of like love interest. And we still, like people are saying in the chat, it might not be like a traditional relationship that they get if we ever get book 2. But even just like what was hinted at felt so out of left field for me that I was not super enjoying it.
There were a couple of times in the book where I felt like it skipped, like the way that she was telling the story was like backwards a little bit. Like when she got kidnapped, and all of a sudden that she's
she would mention
crawling out of the bed, and then I'm like, wait, did I miss something? And then she'd go back and like retell the story, and I felt like that's almost what happened with the romance too. Is that like we skipped all of it, and then she was like, oh wait, let me go back and tell the story. And then Quantum's like, you're in love with him, aren't you? And it gave me a little bit of whiplash. I was like, when did we have a love story?
I think what made it worse is that I was busy shipping her with literally everyone else. Like
Quantum.
Quantum.
Yes. That's what I'm saying. That is what I'm saying. But by the time we got to Quantum,
or like the driver too,
with her driver, and with the guy who was
the general guy.
Yes, the other robot cyborg guy who was like, and she's like talking about all of the ways that now she can see how attracted he is to her, and I was like, kiss. When it was like, no, actually, she has feelings for this guy. I was like, what? I should be like 3 different people that were not this guy.
Felt very much like, going back to like look at it from the end of the book, like the really valuable member of the villain's team that's obsessed and worshiping the villain, and the villain has like either no idea or is exploiting it the whole time to get things that he wants. It's kind of like what it felt like.
I will also say that, like, to the point that the chat is making about, like, maybe this will turn into more of like a close friendship or whatever. The book is really interested in like all of the different kinds of relationships that Anna has, right? And we see this a little bit, especially after she like loses her best friend sort of partway through. And I thought that like plot point was really interesting. But from that point on, it was also interesting to see her form like all of these relationships with her coworkers and her and the moody guy, Keller, I think his name was, and how they ended up being friends too. Love that.
Oh my God, how did this start happening? Wait.
I didn't know. I don't know how
did you do that?
Wait. You're doing it again. Why? I want to do it.
Just
oh my God.
Anyways,
so has it too.
How did you guys feel about the whole plot point with her best friend? I'm gonna keep doing this until
I know. I want to do it too.
I think I noticed in the last live show that I did a thumbs up and it copied it too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I don't know how to make that happen again.
I feel like I didn't even realize that she hadn't come back into the story until we were discussing it right before we came on the live to be like, oh yeah, there was a whole best friend. And I understood the person's perspective where they're like, you're bringing this man right to my door. Like, I'm letting you stay here for free. But I also felt like it was a little bit of an overreaction. I feel like a lot of like the intense emotional scenes I just didn't connect with overall in the book, because like that was another one where I was like, oh yeah, like I understand logically what's happening here, but I felt like there was like a disconnect in terms of like that she completely just stopped talking to her in that way for a bit.
The friend was like I got the friendship, but also I think the voice there for the audiobook also made it like the friend seemed really bitchy.
Yeah.
And you were just like, why are you like, she's mean to you.
Yeah, maybe that's
so why. I don't know. And I'm also such like a gather the wagons, circle the wagons type friend that like when she kept having stuff happen to her, I was like, and you're just gonna like abandon her? Like I'd be like, no girl, like we need to like find you like a high security thing. Like, no, yeah, come stay at my house and I'll get like a whole thing. So for her to be like, I can't deal with the fact that bad things happen to you. It's like, so you're just not gonna be friends anymore? Like, okay. Like that just, I mean, I didn't really like pull for that friendship in that way because I was like, she has better people around her anyway. Fuck you. You suck.
Did they mention at the beginning of the book that her friend was like kind of flaky or like not super invested in the main character in Anna's life? Or am I making that up?
I don't remember the very, very beginning.
I don't think so.
I might have been making that up and just putting. I always read her best friend as being kind of like someone who's a friend of circumstance and not a friend of like.
I mean, that's kind of the vibe that I got too, because it felt more like they were just like, yeah, they were like coworker friends that like were in the hench business and got to like bitch about like their temp jobs. You know, like I never really got a sense of like warmth. Like besides, I mean, we were told she got to stay with that friend and she like opened her house to her and whatever, but like I didn't get like a real sense of like warmth from that friendship. Not that every friendship is like that, but like it just, I felt like she had closer connections with the people at the like supervillain job than she ever did with this girl.
I see Jamila already said that it didn't read that way in the print ebook. It read that way to me, again, listening to the audiobook. So I'm curious again if this is
if it might be an audio. Yeah.
And if anybody else like who read the like print book like read this way. The reason that I think it came off a little bit bitchier despite in addition to like the voice, even at the beginning when they were henching together, you could tell that like June like wanted their friendship to fit in a very specific box, or she wanted like Anna to behave in a very specific way. And like whenever Anna wasn't behaving in that way, June was like, well, kind of snitty or snotty about it. And from like her being, she's like, well, I just want to do spreadsheets at home. And June was like, boo, kind of, like was like the energy. And then when she was like, okay, well, now I'm going out into the field, then June was like, well, we don't know, that's too much. So it was like very like specific parameters of like, this is what I think is acceptable behavior. And so like it made sense that like as Anna started to like, grow out of that like this friendship ended. But that is also why I never felt like the friendship was like very genuine or like very close, because it always felt like it had some of those parameters around them, which is like fair. And that is like something that happens in real life too, is that like you have friends that don't want to see you succeed or want you to fit into a box. But it didn't read like best friendship breakup to me.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and her friend kept pushing her into
Jordan.
When I start talking, there's nobody else. I don't know if I'm the one lagging or what.
It could be anybody. You're good.
I was just gonna say that like her friend is the one that like kept pushing her to do field work, and she does field work one time and then she gets her leg broken. So I mean,
yeah, that shit sucks. It definitely just seemed more like a friendship of convenience than a best friendship. But I do think that Anna felt she was her best friend because it seemed like that was her only friend before. So then she got like more friends, and so there's more connections. But like, that was like her longest friend like in the business for a long time. So it felt more like just like a long-term friendship than necessarily a super close one. Yeah, there was even in the like audiobook. I know like Cadence is saying that like they did not read her as super bitchy in the audiobook, but like there was parts in the audiobook, like I think the audiobook was fairly well, like the diversity of voices she used I think was really good, but sometimes it didn't feel like it was putting a personality on that maybe wasn't necessarily in the reading. Like she even one of June's things when they were fighting at one point, you could tell she was like tensing her jaw and almost like speaking through her teeth. And I was like, why is she sounding so intense about like this thing, you know? So there was just like, there was just times that like in the reading, I think it was cool that she did some of these different voices and it felt a little bit more like differentiated or whatever. But like, there were times that I was like, why is June being so intense about this?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, we're probably audio, non-audio got the same sort of feeling that these are two people that were each other's closest friends, that were probably very good friends to each other. And that even when that relationship ultimately broke, that doesn't stop it from like really like being in like a sore spot or an emptiness that Anna now feels in her life, right? She has multiple times where she like almost texts June or writes these messages, and that I totally get. So yeah, it just I don't know. It read a little bit more like that, like two people who aren't good friends to each other versus like a best friendship or whatnot.
Yeah.
And then she writes her a professionally worded email.
Yeah.
To be like, don't text me anymore. It's like, bitch.
From her business account.
That was funny. Any other side characters that you guys want to mention before on?
I mean, I really liked Quantum when she got brought in.
Yeah.
And like figuring out that like this picture perfect superhero couple really wasn't. And like that was almost like an abusive dynamic. I mean, like it's sort of like for publicity situation. It was interesting because I felt like when we started hearing more about hers, when we get the full picture on Super Collider, because at the beginning I was feeling like, okay, is he actually going to turn out to be not as bad as he seems to be, like not as like dismissive of like human life and whatever. Like when he visited her, like sort of in a disguise kind of thing in the hospital at first or whatever. I was like, well, maybe he like actually cares and she's going to figure out that he actually cares and whatever. And then as that goes on, you're like, no, he's actually like not a great person. Like he's genuinely like, and I think you get that a lot in like the dynamic that you hear about between him and Quantum, where it's like Quantum is actually like more powerful than him. You know, he's just able to like be indestructible, Superman-ish, or like when you find out that she's the reason that he like flew or whatever. It's just that interesting, like, you know, a woman propping up, being forced to like prop up a man kind of thing. So I found her really interesting.
I thought it was interesting that like they both had similar, I guess, like allegations against them of being like unfaithful to each other. And like the public's perception of it for him was very negative. But when it came out about her, people were much more like, not our, like, don't come after our baby Quantum. We love her so much, and like supported her and everything. So like I think that speaks to the fact that he was also like not as great of a person, or seen as a great of a person.
Just very flat.
The other like character, I also love Quantum. Want Quantum and Anna to be Endgame. I know we said that, but I'm repeating it just so everybody knows.
We said it here first. Quantum, Anna, Endgame.
The other character that I like had a grand old time with was E in the beginning, her first boss.
Oh my god!
I feel like I've met that person in a workplace. That like, how do you feel? Like, I don't know, all of that sort of thing. I think
is that like a startup boss?
It is like a startup.
Okay, that's what I felt like.
Yeah, 100%. Like, let's just talk about how you feel, and like we're a family, but also I'm going to send you a fruit basket.
Insane.
Yes.
Loved everything about that. Loved all of the pieces of this that felt like a workplace drama. So wanted to give a little shout out to startup boss E.
Yeah, all the little like connections.
I pictured him wearing like a velvet suit.
Yes.
I just pictured him as like a greasy, I don't know, not greasy, but like he just like a skinny like
hair.
Yes, like the slicked hair, like just like a kind of like guy, you know. And I think wasn't his name like technically Electric Eel?
Yeah.
So it was like like that's
he's
like
supposed to be slimy.
Yes. Yeah, it's just like a slimy dude. Like all those little interactions that like even though I don't remember like a lot of the characters' names necessarily, like all of the little like sort of office personalities were fun. Like like the driver, and like the other guy that was also like cyberkinetic or whatever. All those little like interactions felt very good. Yeah.
I also think I really like the like general idea. Like the reason that I wouldn't like recommend this generally, like I understand why being character driven and sort of very linear in its plot, and then also like some of the ways that it loses momentum in its pacing and like the super, even though I wasn't reading with my eyes, I had heard before that this has like really, really long chapters. Like it's just like I think the entire book.
Because it was like 90 minutes for some of the chapters.
There were 8 chapters in that whole book.
Yeah.
In the entire book, there's 8 chapters. But within the chapters, you would have like breaks, like it would like jump in time. And so listening, it wasn't very easy to always like follow along, like where we were like breaking and going. And I wish like the organization of the book were different. I wish you could have like cleaned that up a little bit. So there are like a lot of reasons why I wouldn't recommend this universally. But some of the things that like made it hit for me were like thematic content and like explorations of things. And we talked a little bit about like the workplace dynamics of it all. But I love the idea of like how good and evil has like this, like, I don't know, what's propping it up is just a bunch of people just trying to do their jobs and just like, trying to buy groceries and like pay rent or whatever. Big mood. As I was like applying for jobs, and I would be like, oh, what an amazing salary. What do these people do? And it would be like weapons manufacture. And I'd be like, oh, like my soul, am I going to barter away? You know, like doing that math. Like, what are you willing to do to put food on your table? I think it's like very real and present. So like seeing that captured in this book, I thought was excellent.
Yeah. Since you read Assistant to the Villain, how do you feel like these compare?
Oh,
I know it's a Red Tower book, but like, let's see.
The Assistant to the Villain, I gave 1 star, and this I gave 4 star. I still kind of stand by the fact that I wouldn't say to an Assistant to the Villain fan, read this next, because I
something different.
Yes, an Assistant to the Villain fan was there for the relationship between the villain and the assistant, and like that was like the driving thing, where that's not the driving thing at all. And this is like gonna make them think in a way that Assistant to the Villain didn't. However, if you hated Assistant to the Villain, and what you really hated, like I did, was like that it introduced this world, but like didn't think at all about any of the mechanics about who the villain was and who he was hurting and like the cost of life or whatever, then if you hated that, then like Hench, I think, is like this did it better.
Directs all of that. Like, why can I not speak? Am I having a stroke? Addresses. Why did I think that word started with a D? It addresses all that. Sorry. Oh my God. I like really couldn't think of words for a second there.
You're not having a stroke because we're all laughing at you. So.
It's like, yeah.
Terrible.
Oh anyway, I'm done talking apparently.
So yes, it does, like all of the things that Assistant to the Villain didn't do, this actually sort of like addresses and talks about. So,
but if you want more of a romance, even with all the questionable asides, you might like Assistant to the Villain.
Yeah, if you're going in it for that romance dynamic.
If you don't critically analyze like you do, it sounds like.
I think so, because I feel like I mean, someone like this, obviously. I saw this book described like the funniest 1-star Goodreads review of it was like that this had like Christian youth pastor humor, was Assistant to the Villain. And that is true, but that is also the kind of romance that it is. Like it's very, they barely kiss. I think maybe they kiss once under duress or something. So it's like very clean. And very just like, oh my God, he's so hot. He's so hot. Like sort of Disney Channel-esque sort of level of romance. So I wouldn't even say, hey, if you want a villain assistant romance.
It's not spicy.
No.
Yeah. Like you're not going to get the spicy.
Oh, interesting.
I thought Red Tower was spicy.
Yeah.
This one is not. Maybe it will be in like book 2 or 3 if you want to give them $30 more or whatever.
Yeah.
Book 1 is not.
Yeah. Okay. Interessante.
Yep. Anything else? Any other like things that hit on or themes that stuck with you? We kind of did this one fast, but that's okay because Sam's over there dying and Paige is recovering from the plague. So,
and also there's like that's the nice thing about this book is I feel like this is one of those like very compulsively readable books that actually has some substance to it because it is just like you get what you get. Like yes, there's some themes about like villainy and versus hero or whatever, but it's not like it's doing anything super new. And it just like does what it says on the tin, which is nice.
I think it does.
Do you have any like?
Go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go first because mine's a different topic. Go first.
No, mine too. Go.
I was gonna ask if anybody had any thoughts on like Super Collider and like what they thought about all of the stuff that came out about him at the end.
Okay, not even like about him, but the scene when she does pulverize him into like a meat sack.
Yo, I was
wild.
cringing listening to that. It was
like
so
that was like, oh my god! Like I was not expecting that level of like, just because most of it is so like you don't really get the impact of like what some of these powers can do until that happened, and you're like, ooh, that got dark. Like,
yes.
Oh man, I mean, like I sort of feel like I was like. Yeah, I was like, go off, girl. But also I was like, oh my god. Like, because every time that they were like, they had to like take his hand out of the goo sack and you're just like, and he's like alive. Like that was, if you think about that too long, it's real
using his eyes to like scan it. Yes. He's just this sack.
It was a lot.
Gross.
I will say that this book, one thing I appreciated about this book was that it sat in the violence so much because that is like a big like criticism of superhero media is that it like hand waves over the violence. So I yes, that last scene will haunt me. But I was feeling that way even from like the beginning scene where she broke her femur, and we spend so much time describing when she's in the hospital all of the different wrong things that went wrong with her leg and all of the surgery that it's going to require, the blood. And we sat in that scene for so long, and I was like, oh my god. But then like I was like, this is exactly the kind of thing that would be glossed over in any other movie or whatever, any other media, is that if a superhero threw you like right,
every bone is shattered. Yes.
There's also that scene with the other, like with the meats, where like one of them gets hit by like the ray, and then his like entire leg is goop. Whatever. Like there was like little moments, and that's what reminded me of The Boys, because like that series also sits in the violence a lot of like this is actually what would happen if like a fast person runs into you, you turn into like mist of blood, like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd just been watching Gen V, which is like a spin-off, so like watching that and reading this at the same time. It's like the perfect kind of superhero genre that I enjoy consuming.
Well, and then the time where she's like, well, I could be that girl from R&D who got slashed in half.
What?
Literally.
Justice for that girl from R&D.
Right.
I just thought that I wasn't expecting it to go, I don't know.
No, that was like another level. Like, like that was another level.
I'm like, this is so much more. I mean, the book is about violence, and like that's the point. But like, it was more than I was expecting it, because I felt, even though all those things do happen, and you sit in them for a while, it's not the same level as like a meat sack man.
I will say, I don't think you need like deep superhero knowledge to enjoy this, but this book does rely on you having some background knowledge, especially for like how hand wavy some of the world building is, where it's just like superheroes and villains and like you get it. And then some of the criticisms it's taking on and sort of deconstructing also kind of rely on you having heard those criticisms before. So some of the stuff about like collateral damage and violence, and like at one point, I don't remember who says it, but I think Super Collider, when he first kidnaps Anna, is talking about like all of his villains are like villains he's made. Like everybody is like one of his nemesis, like it's because of something he directly did, which is like the most Iron Man thing I've ever heard in my entire life.
Oh my god. Yeah, that's real though. And like him being like, yo, there it is. Nice. But like, yeah, and even him having like the self-awareness of like, I should get rid of you now, like because I've made you into like a. Why don't we have it?
I don't know. I think it's racist.
Oh my god! Me. Oh my god.
Yes. We're so easily distracted.
Anyway, yes.
Anything else?
Well, if I don't know, Mari, if you want to mention how there's not really like it's supposed to continue, but there's been
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I got super excited. I don't know what I was looking up. Maybe like average star rating on Goodreads, and I noticed that it was a series. So I went and looked up the book 2 has a current release date on Goodreads as of September 2024. So I happily went to my Discord and was like, "Have you guys heard?" And they were like, "Oh, sweet summer child," because apparently this book has been pushed several times. Book 2 in the series. And it has, as of now, been taken down from the publisher's website like entirely.
No.
It does have a September 2024 release date on Goodreads, but we don't actually know if it's
If that's going to happen.
Yeah, womp womp. Which is sad because I would definitely read a book 2.
I think I would too, but by the time it rolls around, I don't know if I'll be invested enough to do it because this was just like fine for me. Like it was like good, like yeah, like I would, and maybe it would have enough of a like here's what happened in book 1 that like I would be fine to just pick it up, but like I didn't love this one enough to reread it, like you know, so it's like I would just have to like go in and like just not know anything. But if it was available now, I would read it now.
I would reread it. And I also would read book 2. I really love the MCU, which is like to my deep shame and horror. I'm an MCU girly. So there's so much about this. I was just like living, eating. I was well fed. I had a grand old time. So I would reread it. And if I'll periodically just check on Natalie and be like, "Ma'am, are you writing book 2? Hello?"
Right. Are you fine? What's going on? Yeah.
Yes. Let's see. Anything else in chat? I like towards the end, Anna's kind of reckoning with the collateral damage that she has also caused and kind of gritting through it. Yeah. She also has a lot of moments that she's like checking her own boundaries of like, like I want to do this, but do I want to do murder? Like,
right.
Like doing her
own.
Well,
then she murders that one guy.
Yes.
And causes accelerator, something like that.
Oh yes,
causes like a whole cascade of other things.
Yes.
And she was like, maybe that's not what I want to do.
Maybe that's bad, actually.
Yeah. I will say, sorry, I keep saying I will say one more thing that I had in my head that I wanted to mention. When she first like starts her whole plan of like I'm gonna annoy superheroes basically, or like just like start chipping away at their lives. First of all, amazing plan, girly. And why like I think struck such a chord with me is that I immediately thought of like how when people talk about like politicians shouldn't know a moment of peace, like we should be like at every restaurant they show up to, like outside their homes, like politicians should not know a moment of peace. And that this felt like the personification of like that thing, or like the actual like, I don't know, an illustration of what that would look like to a very like evil degree, but also kind of satisfying to be like
exactly. Yes. Yeah, like actions have
she drove Super Collider mad.
Yes. And
yeah, right.
She drove him mad.
So I love that part.
For sure.
Okay, that was the only other thing I wanted to say. Anything else from you guys? Great. So the final thing that we will end with is an announcement. So we had originally picked a book for December, but what we're actually going to do, especially because we are having this live show in December, is we're going to use our final show of the year to do a look back on the year. We always do our rankings and ratings at the end of the year as well. And then we'll pick our next 3 or our first 3 reads for 2024. We're going to do the same thing, right? Pick 3 and those. I've enjoyed it.
I really like this.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll pick our next 3 for 2024, and then we'll also we'll have time to like chat with you guys about what you've been reading, your reading year so far this year, et cetera, et cetera. So yay, we love them too. I love that Zina is doing like math, and then I'm always like, wait, I changed my rating.
No, it's in the spreadsheet.
So we'll do that in December, and then we'll pick up back in January with a new book. So Thank you guys all for joining us. To everybody who recommended this book, there are a bunch of you in chat who joined us to hear us talk about it. Thank you for the recommendation. And we will see you at the end of the month for our recap.
Bye.
Bye.